All right, part three. Hopefully, you guys are having a good morning, afternoon, or evening. The wind took us inshore without any effort to our part, but it looked as if we would land on the rocks instead of on the beach towards where we were heading. At that point, the side of the immense ballistic boulders entered the lake. We were almost on the rocks before bamboo poles touched the bottom, so we could fend off. We made it, however, and the Moro, whom Douglas knew, waded in and shoved our Vienta behind a little breaker he had built into shelter his own boats. I did not mind getting wet in the least, but naturally my camera and movie camera, watch, etc., would have been wet also. After a lot of dickering and talk, Douglas arranged for the Moro to paddle his bed and some of the fish, and the rest were too high, and he gave them to the Moro for his work. Across to Lumbung in a small dugout, the Moro took a very small boy with him, and it was interesting to watch him paddle through the surf and out into deep water. He paddled down the back of the crest of the waves, and as if it could look to us on ashore, he got through without turning or wetting a hair. I shouldered my cameras. The guide finally came and started hiking the trail. First climbing to the top of the beach, which was a hard climb, the Moro boy took us to the main trail we hiked on alone. Mrs. Douglas became alarmed when we did not show up and sent out two search parties, one by boat and another with two horses by trail. We met the latter party, and they were fitted with blankets, dry clothes, whiskey, chow, etc. We got to the house just as dark, and it was 12 o'clock noon when we shoved off from the landing at Gonsalves. So Mrs. Douglas had cause to be worried, in addition to the fact that she had reason from a happening I experienced almost 2 years ago, of which I shall tell later in the letter. The Moro paddler who carried Douglas's packet arrived just after we did, and for some reason did not meet the other search party who went by water. The farm school is on a hill, with buildings overlooking the lake, the elevation being something over 2,000 feet above sea level. The purpose of the school is to teach the young ideals something of scientific farming in addition to the school work. It was established as a primary for the young people of the Moros. The principal crop raised on the farm are upland rice and corn. For some reason, they did not have to have much of a garden stuff planted. The farm supplies the rice and corn needed to feed the pupils. The government supplies the dried fish. Naturally, the boys and 13 girls are required to work their way through school. The school is in the midst of Moro country, and at present a detachment of constabulary guards to the school. 2 years ago, on the 13th of this May month, Douglas took his wife and baby daughter across the lake to Delslin in the morning and returned just after dinner to the farm, 3 hours trip across the lake. About 4 o'clock, just after dinner, 4 o'clock he left the house in charge of 3 servants, 2 girls and a boy, all students of the school. Douglas walked the hill about a quarter-mile to the house, to the fields where his students were working. The servants locked the door, and shortly after Douglas was out of sight, a tough-looking band of Moros appeared and knocked at the door. One of the girl servants opened the door. As she did, she did not like the looks of the Moros, and she locked the door and ran to a small room off the kitchen and hid under the bed. She did not tell the other two a reason of her fright, and the Moros knocked again. A young boy went to the door and opened it, and as the door swung open, one of the Moros swung down his heavy kris and almost cut off the boy's arm. He, with the other girl, ran into a small room, and with the other girl locked the door. The Moors entered the house, in 14 in number, and went to the small room where the servants were and started shooting through the door. They riddled the door and continued shooting until the cries ceased. Then they ransacked the house. The boy and girl were killed. The first girl who hid under the bed was wounded. The Moros took all the clothing, silverware, guns, ammunition, curios, and table linen, in fact, everything of value to them in the house. The safe was opened with a sledgehammer, and 600 pesos in money stolen. The safe was taken out to the yard and opened. They fired a few shots to frighten other teachers and pupils to their houses, and threatened to kill all who came in sight. When Douglas got back, the show was all over. He had to jump and get the house cleaned up, a new door built, and when Mrs. Douglas got back to the place was normal again. That explains the presence of the 6th Stelberry detachment, and also why Mrs. Douglas is apt to get a little nervous when Doug does not show up on time. The leader of the band of outlaws was the bandit King, who was killed in a detachment of the constabulary in November. of last. As I wrote you at the time, he was wearing a pair of trousers belonging to Douglas when he was killed. Miss Douglas was born in India of missionary parents and lived there until she was 17 years old. She is a nurse and served in China before marrying Douglas some 5 years ago. They have one daughter, Dorothy, age of 4 years. Douglas is from Wisconsin, Oshkosh, and went to the University of Wisconsin. He has been out here about 15 years with the Department of Education most of the time. I had spent the night there. The nearest state neighbor, an American, is in Dulstang, 3 hours across the lake. In the morning we took some pictures and I took a look around the farm. I left the afternoon for Dulstang on the government boat, which makes 3 round trips around the lake each week. The boat used to be a gunboat and dates back to Spanish times. A wood burner. It was also used by the American Army when Pershing was in command of Lanao in the early days of the American occupation. It was not a pleasant ride across the lake, windy, and I was in my shirt sleeves. In a great part of the time it was spitting rain. The boat was filled with Moros, and several of them were armed with 45s, pistols and automatics, shotguns. I talked with one Moro, the Justice of Peace, who packed a 45 6-gun, wearing a woolen business suit and a red fez of the Muslim. At the present time there's a lot of unrest among the Moros due to the proclamation of the universal military training, which does not appeal to them. They say we know how to fight already. If you give us guns, we will take to the hills and fight against you. One Moro told me that many of the clan were selling all their possessions and getting ready to die. Others are not planting their crops. The Moro problem is one of the major problems that they'll have solved by Mr. Quezon. We got to Camp Kethley, the old U.S. Army post at DeLand, about 6 o'clock, in a little rain shower. I went up to the Lanao Golf Club, formerly Old Officers Club, I believe, and got to bed there. Camp Kelthey is a beautiful post, now the headquarters of a regiment of cavalry under Colonel Fort, an American. Other Americans in the camp are Governor Heffington, a fine Kentucky gentleman of the old school, now retired from active service, who has chosen to settle down here. I do not blame him. Miss Derrick, the principal of the high school, the wife of one of the men whom I have written about before many times, and the young man named Thompson, a superintendent of schools and a comparative newcomer, 2 years to the islands. There was 2 other Americans in this town, one coconut planter with whom we spent Sunday night, and a teacher from Stillman, who was to give a graduation address, also 1 other sawmill man from the same district. After supper I called Mrs. Derrick, also Governor Heffington. The governor is great gun fan. He attended national matches at Camp Perry, Toledo, some years ago. He has a shop now, and one of his hobbies is fixing and repairing guns. Living alone in solitary splendor now, he is well over 70 years young, as he would say. An old Chinese named Tom runs the club. He says he used to cook for Blackjack Pershing when he was at Lanao, and put out good food. A day or two before my visit, Cristiano had been killed by a Moro and his gun stolen. In the morning I called on Colonel Fort, an old-timer constabulary in the service, and also on the governor of the province, a live Filipino politico who relieved the governor Heffington after his retirement. At noon I took a bus for Ilgan, and 2-hour ride with the Moros, had dinner at the hotel, and then took a car there. I wired for in the morning to Kagan, and then got here about 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, and jumped into 6 weeks of mail. We'll write again later, and I hope that you're all feeling like your old selves by this time. With love and best wishes to all, I am your son, RDW, Winne.